Yes, the meeting has begun, and we are just at item 1, which is public comments for items not on the agenda. There were none here in Sacramento. Are there any on the WebEx?
Thank you for catching us up. So if anyone would like to make a comment on any item that's not already on the agenda, you may look for the hand icon, typically at the bottom of your WebEx window, or if you're on a mobile device, that might be behind the 3-dot other options. And our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hands. Are there any comments that are not already on the agenda? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on to item 2, the approval of minutes from the March 20, 2025 Legislative Committee meeting. Do I have a motion? Yes.
Move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second? Yes, Ms. Rafel. Seconded. Thank you. Are there any comments? Are there any comments here in Sacramento? Seeing none, are there any, moderator, are there any comments from attendees on the WebEx?
This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a comment, you may look for the hand icon and click that to raise your hand. And our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. Any comments? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Reed?
Patricia Batchelor,
Yes.
Nancy Dong, Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Bruce Rafel, Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
and Teresa Thompson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is a written report only. It's the California Board of Accountancy 2025 Legislative Tracking Chart, the 2025 Legislative Calendar, and considerations for taking positions on legislation. Any comments or questions from members? Okay, any public comments here in Sacramento on agenda item 3? Seeing none, moderator, are there any comments or questions on agenda item 3?
This is the moderator. If anyone has a comment on the legislative tracking chart, you may look for the hand icon and click that. Or if you are a call-in user, you may press *3 to raise your hand. Any comments on the 2025 legislative item? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 4 will be presented by Mr. David Hempel, Information and Planning Officer, and we'll start with an update on the California Board of Accountancy sponsored legislation, Assembly Bill 1175 Accountants. Mr. Hempel.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Good morning, members. I am David Hempel, as she mentioned, and I have 3 items to present to you this morning. I will begin with item 4, that update on Assembly Bill 1175. On May the 5th, AB 1175 passed out of the Assembly by a floor vote of 77-0 with 2 abstentions. Woohoo. The bill is currently in the Senate and just got word yesterday that it has been referred to the Business Professions and Economic Development Committee, and so we will be awaiting its first hearing date. Since our last LC meeting, AB 1175 was amended 3 times, April 1st, April 8th, and finally April 28th. Part of this was to address the issues discussed at the March meeting, to give the CBA authority to establish regulations to accept board-recognized certificate and training programs as a substitute for a portion of the experience requirement, and that the CBA may use its discretion in implementation of these. It also limits the amount of experience that can be substituted. For example, a candidate could only reduce the experience requirement by 1 year with a master's degree, or 6 months with a board-recognized certificate, but not both. The April 28th amendments removed the emergency rulemaking authority that was originally associated with AB 1175. To accommodate the time needed to complete the non-emergency rulemaking process, the implementation date for the new licensure requirements was pushed back 6 months to January 1st, 2027. The legacy requirements will continue to be valid through December 31st, 2028, providing a 2-year window where candidates could apply for licensure with either the legacy or the new requirements. Staff recommends that the LC retain its support and sponsor position on this measure. No action is necessary on this item. I will turn it back over to Chair Thompson for any questions the members may have.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions on item 4? All right. Should I take? And for folks in the room and online, I will be taking public comment for items 4 through item 6H at the very end. Mr. Hempel, you can continue with item 5, please.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. So let's move on to item 5, which we're calling a review and possible action on legislation with CBA impacts. So these are bills the staff would like to highlight and go into a little more depth with you this morning, but aren't looking for the committee to recommend taking a position on at this time. Instead, we would welcome any insight members may have as we look to work with stakeholders and the author to help shape the overall legislation. So let's begin with 5A, Assembly Bill 1405, dealing with artificial intelligence and auditors' enrollment. This bill would establish an enrollment process within the California Government Operations Agency for artificial intelligence, or AI, auditors, allowing them to perform any covered audits which require an audit of an AI system or model by an independent third party. The overall focus of AB 1405 is to create transparency and ensure competency and ethical standards for these enrolled auditors. However, in its current form, the bill will likely create inconsistencies in who can perform the audits and how they are completed, leading to significant differences in the results and the costs associated with the reports. There's also the potential of overlapping regulatory responsibilities in the oversight of these auditors, which may need to be sorted out, increasing implementation costs even more. These outcomes appear to be contradictory to the goals of the bill. Specific issues that staff have noted are: AB 1405 does not specify the qualifications necessary for an individual to enroll as an AI auditor, leaving the role open to both CPAs and non-CPAs. An audit typically verifies the accuracy and reliability of financial statements and reports, and the scope can be limited to financial records and compliance with accounting standards. If such assurance services were conducted by a CPA, they would be done under established AICPA attestation standards and would be subject to specific reporting standards. Non-CPAs performing these audits would not be bound to these same standards. As the analysis states, perhaps some examples from the AICPA attestation standards could be included in the bill to aid in the transparent, public, and reasoned process being sought by this measure. Again, staff has no recommended position on this measure, but I invite any insight members may have and do request to be given the authorization to work with stakeholders and the author to share information, provide guidance, and be a resource to help shape this overall legislation. So that is all for item 5A. I will turn it back to the chair for any questions, comments, and a possible motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hempel. I have one quick comment or question. Have the authors of AB 1405 to date reached out to anyone on the CBA for input or guidance?
Not that we're aware of at this point.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Batchelor.
Yes, I have a question. With this idea, with the author's idea, how did this come about? To open it up for CPAs and possibly non-CPAs to be able to perform audits?
I'm going to have Executive Officer Dominic Franzella help me with that.
So we don't have a lot of history on this particular bill at this point. It was brought to our attention primarily through Cal CPA. It's something we had an eye on, but not really given a lot of consideration to. And so At Cal CPA's request, we started to get more involved in looking at this, but there's several AI bills out there right now. This just happens to be the one that's most impactful to us. It's something we can work with the author and get some more information on the background on, but I know it's really trying to create some understanding of how AI, trying to create some reliance on AI through these types of auditing standards or audit reports.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Rosenbaum.
A question, and maybe you might be the person to answer. Do you know, or are we aware of what efforts some of the larger accounting firms are making with respect to AI auditing?
I do not know that. Something we can look at.
Yes, I have another question. This is at the level to be a bill right now, is that correct? And just say, for instance, it passes and it starts to go through the assembly. It still would have to come before us in order to be adopted, or?
No, this bill is going through the legislative process. It's not, the statutes don't affect our board per se. The question really is, and as highlighted by Cal CPA, and this isn't just isolated to California, there's also on the national level, the AICPA and others are dealing with this on a federal level of trying to understand how to audit AI and standards under which it would be audited and who should be auditing those systems. And so right now, this bill, as you see it today, doesn't have any of the specificity of the type of standards or who would be required to do it. The implementation does not require the Board of Accountancy to be involved, but we're trying to get some understanding of how that oversight may occur if this bill were to continue down the legislative path.
Mr. Rayfel.
So David, you said in your presentation that there were some regulatory inconsistencies. What other regulatory body in state government would be looking at this other than CBA?
So right now, again, this bill doesn't require it to be done by a CPA. So at present, anybody could likely register with, I believe it's under the governmental
Operations Agency.
operations agency, and that would be an oversight body who is responsible for handling these AI audit reports. And so there would be potentially some inconsistencies related to what standards individuals would be required to do it, because the CPA would only be able to offer these standards presumably under the AICPA, where let's say it's an engineer, a computer engineer of some sort, they might be using different standards and the reports would be potentially fundamentally different. So there could be some inconsistencies on the types of standards that individuals would be using.
So given that example, engineers wouldn't have to, even though they were doing auditing, they wouldn't have to register with CBA.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't there some
Yes.
restriction or use on the word audit?
Yes, depending. It depends on how that term is being used. It is a protected term, just like the term accountant is, but it depends on how they're holding out and who they're offering the services to. But audit has become more synonymous with just performing compliance reviews of certain things.
But the bill, the digest anyway, uses the term auditors.
Correct. It doesn't, but I would say at this point, it doesn't require it to be a CPA. It would,
Right.
so again, these are things that we'd like to bring up with the author and work through to understand what their concerns are or what they're trying to achieve, and understand how it may impact us.
Does AB 1405 have any limitations around the scope on which companies would have to, if this were to pass, would have to comply with this? Would it be just California-based companies, being that this is a state bill, or could it be broader to companies that are public and have SEC filings?
Honestly, I don't know at this particular point. It's something we can continue to work and get some understanding on.
Yes, Ms. Batchelor.
My question is, there's controls in place to prevent people that are not qualified to do audits to not do audits. And so the question is, with these audits, would they forego an opinion like we have, the unqualified opinion and different things like that? You know, would they use our standard language in their reports, or would it be something totally different?
So one thing I would just, I mean, this gets back to Mr. Rosenbaum's point. I don't think they necessarily consider the term audit in the similar sense as the CPA would consider the term audit. So they're using it more ubiquitously just in terms of somebody going in and doing a review of the system. If it were a CPA, yes, it would fall under the AICPA attestation standards likely. But if one of the concerns that's been raised by Cal CPA and even the AICPA on the federal level and that staff have identified is there are no set standards under which this would have to be done. So it could be different for one person than another person versus a CPA who would do it. So there would be potentially inconsistencies in how those quote unquote audit reports are being presented.
So therefore, like say for instance, if a bank or a nonprofit organization is supposed to do an audit, they can probably say, well, we'll just bypass a CPA and go to these auditors if it's accepted, if it makes it through the legislature.
For the AI system, ostensibly, yes.
So the recommendation from staff on item 5A is simply requesting authorization to continue working with stakeholders and the author to share information, provide guidance, and be a resource to help shape the overall legislation.
I think we're fine with just direction.
Okay.
From the board, we're not looking for a position at this particular time. Really just want to have more of an active presence. I can go down there and talk to the author and do certain things from a staff perspective, but it carries more weight if the board is shared that we have some concerns, not opposition, but some concerns to some of the topics and just want to better understand kind of what's going on.
I think it's, oh, Mr. Rosenbaum. Oh, I was just going to say, I think that it is, the board is in agreement that you guys or your team can continue with these discussions as necessary. Okay. 5B, yes. Mr. Hemphill, can you continue with 5B, please?
I shall. Thank you. So item 5B, we're actually combining 3 school accountability measures, which are Assembly Bill 84, Senate Bill 414, and Senate Bill 719, that all specifically reference the California Board of Accountancy. And we're going to combine these into one analysis. Just like item 5A, we're not looking for the LC to recommend a position on the bills, but would appreciate members' feedback once again. So these 3 bills all are attempting to prevent charter school fraud by strengthening the oversight of local education agencies, which we'll call LEAs, and this includes charter schools. The concepts contained in the bills propose to establish various accountability measures for LEAs by implementing legislative components of a report released by the state controller last fall titled Audit Best Practices for Detecting and Curtailing Charter School Fraud. One of the bills, SB 719, failed its committee deadline earlier this month, so that one is unable to move forward this year. We still included SB 719 in this analysis, though, as elements of the failed bill could still make their way into either AB 84 or SB 414 by way of future amendments. One of the larger concerns identified in the bills is regarding the peer review provisions. AB 84 calls for all accounting firms or CPAs conducting LEA audits to have been peer reviewed by the CBA. SB 719 would have required the CBA to adopt regulations to ensure accounting firms or CPAs conducting LEA audits be peer reviewed by someone with experience conducting LEA audits, and that an LEA audit is included in the engagements selected to be part of the peer review process. These peer review provisions conflict with the nationally established peer review program that has standardized processes approved by the CBA and other state boards of accountancy. Peer review for a state-specific program would not be covered under this existing peer review program used by the CBA and would be a massive undertaking to attempt to develop on our own. Another element of these bills surrounds initial training and continuing education for the auditors. All of the bills would require 24 hours of initial training and more continuing education hours every 2 years thereafter. SB 414 leaves it up to the state controller to determine the topics, but AB 84 and SB 719 specify the training to include governmental accounting, auditing, or LEA-related subjects. It should be noted, and the reason we're bringing this up is that at our last March CBA meeting, the board gave direction to remove the current requirement for 24 hours of CE for governmental accounting because it is duplicative of GAGAS, the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, or the Yellow Book. One more thing, AB 84 states that accounting firms or CPAs conducting the LEA audits must have certified prior experience. Current language provides no clarity as to the definition of the term certified prior experience. And of course, the CBA does not have any such requirement prior to undertaking an engagement. Instead, professional standards suggest CPAs only agree to perform services they have a level of competence to complete with the expected quality. One other aspect to consider is that LEA audits do fall under the attest engagements umbrella, meaning to sign off on an LEA audit, a CPA must have attest authority. And finally, AB 84 and SB 719 contain provisions to refer certain matters to the CBA for investigation. The CBA presently does receive referrals from the State Controller's Office, and the new language may increase this, specifically the provisions related to not meeting the proposed CE or training requirements. So as you can see, there's a number of issues across these bills that staff wish to get guidance from the committee as we prepare to work with stakeholders and potentially the authors to share information to shape the bills as they move forward. Again, staff is not asking the LC to take a position, but we would appreciate members' feedback and again request the authorization to work with stakeholders and the bill's authors. I will once again now turn it back to the chair, and Mr. Franzella and I are happy to answer questions, and we appreciate your comments and a possible motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hempel. One question for you. Does the CBA's existing peer review framework and process, would that cover this proposal for LEE financial and compliance audits to comply with, or would it require overhaul to our existing peer review framework?
So when David volunteered me, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the ones answering the questions on. So whether or not you're looking at Assembly Bill 84 or 719, they approach the peer review requirement slightly differently, but they do touch on a similar topic, which is that the LEA audits they must actually be selected and reviewed as part of peer review. So under our existing program, they would be, that would not be the requirement. They would fall under the must select engagements, and they could be selected. And depending on the type of firm they're at, it likely could be selected, but it's not mandated it be a selected engagement, especially across all the partners in the firm necessarily. Under 84 and SB 719, it's a requirement that those would be needed to be part of the peer review process. Likely, since we're using a national program to do the peer reviews, I'm not convinced that the AICPA or that program would modify its standards to meet this requirement. So of the peer review items in the bill, this is one that is concerning.
Thank you. My second question is, are we aware of any other state that has a similar bill on charter schools, a similar requirement?
I'm not aware of any other states that even have LEA type requirement or charter school requirement audits. But again, I don't, we're not out there looking at that kind of issue.
And this is coming from a specific incident that occurred, several years ago. And that's why this, the task force was formed and the best practices were released.
Yes, Mr. Rosenbaum.
So I don't understand, but do the charter schools, are they, you're saying you don't know whether they are required to have audits done at this point?
Here they are. I can't speak to what they're doing in other states. Yes, LEA charter schools here in California have audit requirements. Yes.
And so these bills are, I guess, from your analysis, really only attempting to strengthen requirements for these particular entities.
So this bill, or these three bills, are in response to issues that came up with charter schools, and especially non-classroom based charter schools, I think is one of the bigger issues there. And so since 2019, around 2019, 2020, they've been looking at this and looking at possible improvements, both to who does them, how they're trained, the requirements under which the audits would be performed. But there already is a structure in place. These are just improvements to it, ostensibly, but they do have some significant impacts to us in terms of how CPAs could meet these qualifications. And peer review being one of them. If a firm had to go through a peer review program that required their LEA audits to be selected, our program doesn't do that today. And nor do I think the ICPA would make modifications to do that in the future. So the board would have to step in and fill that gap.
I understand. I guess the question though is, so currently these LEAs are being audited and they are being audited by CPAs with a test response authority.
Yeah, there's for the entire state, there's about 50 firms who are registered to do this work with the state controller's office.
Okay.
Ms. Batchelor.
The problem existed with the schools in California. Is that where it was first? Was it several schools or just?
There was one particular instance down in San Diego that really kind of brought some of these issues to light and led to criminal issues for the owners of those charter schools.
Thank you.
Ms. Tong.
To go off of Mr. Rosenbaum's question, so if you look at the task force, they, did mention that the current audits are adequate. However, they do have recommendations that include changes to related parties, communication, work papers, things like that, I guess at some point would have to be adopted if the bill passes. So my question is, how far along are we in terms of the passage of AB 84?
So AB 84 is in Senate or Assembly Appropriations, and I believe Assembly Bill 414 is on the floor. And
I think it's on suspense.
okay,
Yeah.
then it might be on suspense. And then, like I said, Senate Bill 719 it did meet its policy committees. However, concepts that are in that bill likely are going to probably find their way into some of these other bills. Part of what's the issue is there's a moratorium in place that expires at the end of this year related to approving additional, I think, non-charter or non-classroom-based schools. And so there's a moratorium there. And so in order to start addressing this, one of these bills or however these bills kind of get through are needing to pass this year. So I anticipate something is going to be passed this year that'll address these. But the reason why we have three bills is you have a bill that was the controllers because they thought it should go one way. The charter schools, which is 414, thought it should look this way. And then FCMAT, who is a kind of a non-governmental agency, thought it should be in a different way. So you have these three competing bills all kind of doing similar things, but attacking it slightly different. And I anticipate over the course of the year, the legislative years, some reconciliation will occur where one of these bills and the concepts in them will continue to advance. As for the actual underlying audit work, the training, and so on, I anticipate that would not occur until after these bills or one of these bills gets approved. Rebecca, can you under your mic, please?
Just in terms of where we are in terms of AB 84, because I feel a lot of the discussion, at least in the media, has been about AB 84, and it's in appropriations right now. So does that mean that it's pretty far along?
It's on it.
Or-
All these bills are in their house of origin, so they're on their one side of the house. They're all on the two of them are on the suspense file, so we'll know later this month where how they might be amended or how they may get through. But they're just in their first stage right now.
AB 84 had a hearing yesterday in appropriations and was placed on the suspense file. So that's the most up to date on that.
So in just a last follow-up question, in terms of how it influences sort of, how we do our operations in terms of peer reviews, et cetera, if the bill passes, then they come back to CBA to have further guidance, or do we have any input into the process apart from either recommending the bill or asking for further questions and inquiries?
So what we're trying to do is become more involved in the process, but no, none of these bills, neither of these bills, at least 84 and 414, require them come back to the board. The board will have to adapt as a result of their passage. So if nothing were to change, the board would need to pivot and kind of develop its own quasi peer review program to address this particular issue, if that were to be the case.
Yes, Ms. Batchelor.
In terms of Senate Bill 719, it says that CPA firms would have to go through a peer review requirements. With this being an audit, it's already going through peer review. Is that correct? That's first part of my question. And the second part is, it looks like the state controller would conduct their own periodic quality control reviews of the auditors doing the job. So question one was, within that peer review that we already have in place with all the testing engagements, has that not been covered, or it has been covered?
It's part of the process. It doesn't require it to be covered. So one of the things within the AICPA's program is when you're going through the system reviews for the audits, there's a series of things called must selects. A must select engagement would include yellow book audit, governmental auditing. And so the firm would provide a list of engagements that it did in that space. And the peer review team captain, the peer reviewer, can select certain engagements. They may select what would have been an LEA audit, they may not have. Under 719, it would require that selection occur, which is not how the AICPA's program currently functions. You choose from a list of must selects, but it doesn't necessarily require that the LEA audit would be one that was selected.
Okay, thank you.
Based on the discussion, I think that members would be very supportive of staff continuing to engage with stakeholders and providing guidance on these bills. Okay, Mr. Hemphill, we can go ahead and move on to item 6, which is the review and consideration of possible positions on legislation the California Board of Accountancy is monitoring.
Great, thank you again. So there are 11 more bills working their way through the legislature that CBA staff are currently monitoring. Many of these measures may see other content added or may be taken up in the second year. Among these are bills that have to do with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, licensing waivers and exemptions during states of emergency, among others. As these bills continue to move through the legislature and evolve into legislation that may impact the practice of public accountancy or have a greater impact on the operations of the CBA, staff will prepare an analysis and the bill will be presented at a future CBA meeting. So no action needed on this item. That concludes my presentation, and I hand it back to you, Chair Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Hemphill. I'll now open it up to any public comments on LC item 4, 5, or 6 here in Sacramento.
Hello, Pat Joyce here on behalf of the national accounting firms. Just want to go back to, I think it was item 4, AB 1405 on AI auditors. So this is a bill the large accounting firms are certainly aware of, following and tracking. We've had some conversations with the author and expressed concerns over a lot of the topics that you all covered here today. Mainly the lack of any uniform standards to kind of do assurance engagements on AI systems, and the fact that there would be, non-CPAs and the CPAs and inconsistencies it would create. For instance, CPAs obviously have to adhere to professional standards and requirements, and non-CPAs do not. So that's concerning. There's a little bit of history. So the author has another bill, AB 1018, that would require third-party impact assessments done by independent auditors for automated decision systems. So that's why she wants the AI auditor enrollment process is for that bill. And I think we're going to see more of this. A lot of the experts, AI experts out there in academia, and are kind of advising policymakers and saying, there's concerns around AI, harms it could cause, whether it's large language learning models or automated decision systems creating biases in their outcomes. So part of the guardrails that they're proposing are these third-party audits. So it's relatively new, I think, to the board and to this group, but it's going to be ongoing discussions about it. So really want to encourage the board to weigh in specifically with the author on AB 1405 and kind of continue, getting smarter on this issue, because I think it's something that the board's going to have to deal with in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no additional public comments in Sacramento. Moderator, are there any public comments from individuals on the WebEx?
Certainly there are, and I will let everyone know that if you'd like to make a comment on any of the items in agenda items 4, 5, and 6, you can look for the hand icon and click that to raise your hand. Our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. We have a request for comment from Jason Fox. Jason, I'll send you the request to unmute your microphone. Go ahead.
I would align my comments with Mr. Joyce on the AI auditor provisions. I think this is certainly a conversation the board will want to be a part of, particularly as the markets and policymakers start to move into providing assurance around these non-financial kind of data systems and whatnot, and where the profession is trying to fill a need from a market and a public need to be able to provide that clarity and direction on that. On the school audit pieces, I think the staff did a good job kind of outlining the different dynamics. We've been engaged with all of the conversations. Unfortunately, the reports that kind of helped inform the legislation did not include outside auditors or anybody from the Board of Accounts as part of that, kind of to inform that. And so we're really trying to weigh in and provide the insights of how a outside accounting firm or CPA would provide those services, and certainly supportive of the intent behind it, but trying to figure out how can we make it work within kind of the existing regulatory framework that the CPAs already fall under. And I think it's important for the board to be a part of that conversation. So it would be supportive of that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do not see any further requests for comment. Shall I close that public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we can conclude our legislative committee meeting. Thank you.